Hello everyone, welcome to the final of our webinars for Invasive Species Week. So very pleased to be joined today by Steph Bradbeer from Yorkshire Water, Simeon Gur from Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and Andy Virtue from the Environment Agency. Before we start, I'm going to run through a few quick things and then I'll hand over because we've got 3 talks today, so lots to get through, but we'll have time for questions at the end. So the webinar is being recorded, just to make you aware, and we'll be sharing the link afterwards on our website so you can catch up with it. If there are any issues that you can't hear, I'd just suggest try logging off and logging in again. But if you can't see it, then there'll be a link later, so you'll be able to watch it afterwards. And as usual, we'll do the Q&A at the end, so we'll have the talks back to back. And then if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll go through those at the end. But yeah, I think that's everything from me. So I'll hand over to Steph, who's going to talk about INNS Mapper.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for having us. And yeah, welcome all that have joined. Let me just quickly get my slides loaded. And I'm hoping, just give the internet a minute to catch up, and then I'm hoping we're all good. Lucy, is that okay?
Yep, that's perfect.
Perfect. Right. So yeah, welcome everyone. Again, thanks for having us. And Simeon and I are going to run through this PowerPoint on INNS Mapper, or should I say Borodar and say Mappier INNS, for our Welsh contingent, hopefully in the room as well. So this is a tool that you may or may not already be aware of that launched last August. And is an app and a website for reporting sightings, surveys and management of invasive non-native species in Great Britain. So this is a shorter presentation running through some of the functions that INNS Mapper can be used for. And then also Simeon's going to touch on the actual practical use of it from a Yorkshire Wildlife Trust perspective. So if we click on to the next slide, just to recognise everyone involved in this project. So around the edge of this slide, Natural Aptitudes is the developer of the app and the website. And then we have all of our steering group and funders on the project board around the room on this slide. So just to really recognise both the financial contributions that have gone towards this project, but also the recognition by these groups of the need of INNS Mapper and its practical use. So just to slightly reiterate what I've said on the first slide, INNS Mapper is both an app and a website for reportings of different types of data for invasive non-native species in England, Wales and Scotland. It's free to use, free to download. You do need to have a user account to be able to submit records, but it's free. And the main aim of INNS Mapper is to be that effective resource to support invasive species programs and coordinate efforts. As we all know, invasive species like to cause us some headaches, and we really need to work together at the kind of catchment level, regional level to tackle invasive species. And this tool hopefully helps us to know who's doing what where, and also if there's any populations that aren't being tackled by anyone, know where those are. The tool is available in Welsh and English, so you're able to report and do all of the functions in Welsh. And the data itself, I do have a slide on it, but it's open access, publicly available for anyone. So you're able to go on there and download data, either all of the data, which would be a very big file, or subdivide it by either the region or the species that you're interested in. So we do have some stats on the corner just here. So it launched last August, and as of our last look, we've got almost 1,500 users registered on INNS Mapper and just shy of 1,500 new records submitted to INNS Mapper. You'll see when you go on the tool, there are more records than that on there. Those are some historical records that have also been provided to INNS Mapper by other organisations. So those are new records since launch for that value there. Slide. So what you can use INNS Mapper for is the reporting of a sighting. You spot an invasive species. You can report surveys, so that's for us to be able to understand who's actually monitoring in certain areas and again where hasn't been surveyed. Reporting of management, which is a key new aspect of invasive species reporting to help with the kind of central management of invasive species. There is a verify function, there's ID guides, and then like I've already said, you can view and download data on INNS Mapper, both on the app version when you're out in the field, has this already been reported, or have I spotted something new, all the way through to on the website downloading the data and being able to load it into your own internal systems. Oh dear, lost my mouse. There we go. There are 62 invasive species able to be reported on INNS. So these are freshwater or terrestrial species. That includes plants, invertebrates, and mammals. And the key focus of INNS is the management aspect. And so the species on INNS relate to that. So the species able to be reported on INNS are species that are either widespread and under management, things like giant hogweed, widespread, but where management efforts are less widespread. So things like crashula, where we may have new methods coming up that we would like to implement, but some of the management methods are still a little bit limited for now. Or species that are present with high impact, so things like zebra mussels. We do not include any horizon species on INNS, and there's also the reason why there's not the option of other when you're reporting a species, so that we avoid any alert species or horizon species being reported and not then triggering an email to Lucy to deal with any potential new incursions. So I'll quickly just take you through how the reporting function works. So when you're reporting an invasive, you're able to add up to 3 photos onto INNS. Obviously, if it's safe to do so, and in the mammal sense, if it hasn't already scurried past, you might not be able to get a photo. So photos are optional, but if it's safe to do so, you can do so up to 3 photos. And our ID guides really highlight the kind of key features that need to be able to be identified to identify a species. So we encourage users to make sure that those photos are helpful to then allow verification at the later stage. You then pick which invasive species it is. If there's one that you see an awful lot, for example, Himalayan balsam that's on the screen here, there is a star function, so you can make sure that that species is at the top of your list for future reporting. Saves you scrolling down each time just to find that species. And then once you've just said what species it is you've spotted, you can either report point data, area data, or a line for the sighting that you've got. So this is particularly helpful if you see, for example, an invasive plant like Himalayan balsam, and it's all the way along the river, being able to capture the data that reflects that it is across this area rather than just relying on point data. And then the dates will automatically fill in, but you can submit historical data that way as well. You can either submit the area, which is appropriate for plants. Say, for example, you saw a grey squirrel. You don't have 2 meters squared of grey squirrel, you have 1 individual, so you can change it to individual rather than area meter squared. And then you've also got level of confidence. So that again encourages users that if you're not quite sure what the species is, we'd rather a report came in that could then go through the verification system rather than people being unsure and not reporting. So you can actually report species and then also highlight that you're not super certain about the species reporting. Just to quickly skim over to INNS surveys, there's 2 types of surveys you can conduct on INNS. There's a general one where you're going out, walking through an environment, looking for any invasive species. You can also do a targeted survey. And the main focus of a targeted survey is someone is going out specifically looking for up to 5 invasive species at a particular time and saying that they are specifically putting effort into trying to spot those invasive species. The reason we've incorporated this into INNS is because we recognise the importance of non-detection data, or some people may call it absence data. We hazard to call it that. Non-detection is probably more appropriate when we're talking about invasive species. So that's where, for example, if you were wanting to go out look for giant hogweed, you could do a targeted survey, say, I'm looking for giant hogweed. And in a scenario where you then do not make any reports of giant hogweed during that survey, INNS will come up with a pop-up saying you were looking for, insert species here, giant hogweed in this scenario. You did not make any reportings. Would you like to make a non-detection record? And that data can be captured on INNS as well. So for a targeted survey, like I say, you can pick up to 5. It could just be 2. You then start doing a walk. It's similar to Strava in some senses or other tracking systems where you start your walk, you walk around effectively, it will track where you've gone. If you do spot invasive species, you can make records and just follow the exactly same process that I've just shown you on the previous slides. Then once you've completed your survey, it will have the whole way around that you've gone, how far you've gone, how long you took to walk it, all of those things. And then, like I said here, no evidence of giant hogweed found. Would you like to confirm a non-detection report? And then finally, just to talk on the management aspects. So the main key aspect of reporting into management is to heighten the coordination of programmes in a region, in a catchment. You know, it doesn't have to be over great areas, but just making sure that if we are trying to remove or even eradicate a certain species, we are tackling the whole location where that species is and not missing out, especially a potential source location. We do highlight that for management, not all the management methods that are an option on INNS Mapper are appropriate for the species you might be looking to manage. So effectively saying you need to go away and check that the appropriate management you're undertaking is appropriate for that species. But then you can go on, in this scenario, it's Himalayan balsam, say what management options you're doing. You can click multiple things if they're appropriate. You can outline if it's a one-off treatment or part of a repeat program. Management effort is included here, partly because a lot of the local action groups highlighted that for funding purposes, they need to capture how many, for example, volunteers and how many days programs of work were going on for. So it allows us to capture that data and for that data to be retained. And then you also have optional data inputs of the organisation who either completed the training, completed the management, apologies, and then also photos and any other comments appropriate could be included in that record. So now I'll just hand over to Simeon, where we're going to talk through some of the practical uses of INNS Mapper since it's launched from a Yorkshire Wildlife Trust perspective. Is that all right, Simeon?
Yeah, hi guys. As Steph mentioned, I work as part of the INNS team in the West region of the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And as an organisation, we coordinate and control the management of invasive species across a couple of river catchments over in West Yorkshire, primarily the River Colne and the River Calder. We are using INNS Mapper, taking over from some of our old systems as a way to try and help us with that. As it sort of says at the bottom, it's free and easy to use, and the open access data is a very handy point, particularly because we then get records from both volunteers and other practitioners who are in the area who may spot things, but also because we don't always carry out the management for landowners. There are a few landowners who actually have their aquaherbs, have in-house management teams who actually we coordinate with, and then they can record their management of the areas that we then highlight to them. And that's really useful for us because we then get, from the map part of INNS Mapper, we then get a full catchment picture of who is managing what where, and if there is anything that's not being managed, which landowner it is that we can then go and approach. And so it's this systematic joined up approach to INNS management from the top of the catchment all the way down that we've been trying to run across the rivers and has been running for about 8 years now. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Steph? Cool. So here's just a little stretch of river, part of the River Colne, does run through central Huddersfield, so it's quite an urban area. Not really much more to say. Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. And yeah, this is Elliot. So he's one of the colleagues who's part of the team. And we've got a lovely stand of knotweed there on the left bank. For the keen-eyed among you, you may notice that it's a GPS unit that Elliot's holding and not a phone. The way we've run our system in previous years is that we've reported and recorded all of the INNS on GPS units, which, if you've ever used them, are incredibly fiddly, don't always work. The GPS is often completely off and we have to then re-bring things back in afterwards. And so INNS Mapper provides a really useful solution in that you can actually put the point exactly where you want it to be put, and that's particularly helpful. But yeah, so first step of our management is we're in the channel. We record both points, lines and areas for where the invasives, in this case we do a lot of work on Japanese knotweed, hence why we've got a Japanese knotweed picture here, and then that all gets put in onto the database. Can I have the next slide, please, Steph? We then bring that out of INNS Mapper and we put it into our own GIS systems. So the old system, the INNS Mapper, will now fill the gap of. We used to, as Steph said, have to just have everything as points, which meant in the comment section we had to say whether we actually wanted it to be points, whether it was a whole area or a stretch, or whether it was an individual. Whereas with INNS Mapper, we now have the opportunity to put that in from the get-go and know exactly what we're looking at right from the beginning. Next slide, please. So we then divide up all the records that we found, or records of other people who have also recorded things, and then we divide them up into individual land parcels. Steph, can you have the next slide, please? So we'll just take that one there. Next slide, please. And then we'll approach the landowner. We'll let them know that the problem's there. We'll normally have contacted them beforehand, so they know we're doing the surveys. We'll let them know where the invasives are, and then try and coordinate with them to get treatment carried out, either via their own internal system. They're welcome to go to other contractors, but we also do offer treatment ourselves. And this is the landowner buy-in scheme part, where we basically charge to cover our time, the materials and training. And so it's generally much cheaper than sort of contractors, and so landowners are much more able to do paying for those sorts of things. That's what we found. It's why we generally get quite positive responses from landowners. And so we go out physically, either spraying or, next slide, stem injecting. So particularly for the first year growth, that's the best way to get a targeted dose of pesticide down to the knotweed and really sort of knock it on the head. But this is a multi-year system that we have. And so can I have the next slide, please? And so what we need to make sure as well is that we record the management. And the particular thing is not just the management system that's in place, but also particularly who's doing it, how we're doing it. From our perspective, the landowners that we work with who do their own in-house management, we've actually got them to download INNS Mapper, and they're starting to record it all in-house, which just really helps us. Instead of us having to keep emailing and chasing people up, we're able to just sort of get that on, in one single space. Can I have the next slide, please? Yep, and there's just some more details about what the management is, what the species is, and in particular, letting other NGOs and particularly members of the public that may have heard that Japanese knotweed exists and get a bit panicky as soon as they suddenly see it right near their land. They can see the management and see that the frequency is repeat, and they know that we're coming back and it's part of a wider system of management, and it's not something that is just a one-off thing that is being done and then kind of left alone. And so it's we've had some positive conversations with landowners and members of the public who are really pleased to see that things are being done, as opposed to some landowners know it's there, but get so scared to go anywhere near it because obviously knotweed being knotweed. And so it's nice that members of the public can see that things are being done about it as well. Can I have another slide, please? Cool. So just a bit of summary of how the treatment season has gone. We've brought just under 60 kilometres of watercourse into management. So that's both treatment, coordinating treatment with individual landowners, as well as landowners that we're in the process of talking to and sort of bringing on board. As you can see, we generally do work in a top-down manner. Some of the landowners, particularly lower down, are large landowners, and so we've brought them all in at once. And we do also get landowners changing hands, which is why we get some patches, particularly in that midsection. But part of this year and this overwinter, we've actually brought on about 2 or 3 of those landowners already, and we've not even started the actual surveys and engagement with some of the other ones yet. So that's already fantastic. In 2023, we had some of the 6 new landowners brought into the system as well. So it is a growing treatment season where we are looking to continue to expand to get the lower sections of the column as well. And one of the benefits of having this all on INNS Mapper as well is that it then feeds into our restoration. So as well as doing the treatment, we also look to restore using wildflowers, plug plants, and other sort of infrastructural restoration techniques to try and improve the resilience of banksides to generally the secondary invasion of species such as balsam, which obviously jumps in nice and quickly along the rivers. To try and help along that, we've also got some rust fungus trials across a number of sites across the Calder and Colne, one of which being one of Yorkshire Water's sites, which is very exciting. So we're currently in the process of figuring out, hearing back from CABI, who are the organisation who are running those trials, which genetic strain of rust fits the balsam that we've got, and fingers crossed we'll be able to get that out very soon. And so it all ties into this big picture of catchment scale management, and that's something that's been going, as I say, going on for 8 years, and we look to continue going forwards. And INNS Mapper is going to be an integral part of how we manage that. Back to you, Steph.
Brilliant, thanks, Amiam. I've just got a few more slides just to run through some of the other functions of INNS, but in lesser detail, and any other kind of questions or follow-ups I can follow off after this presentation. So as well as the functions I've already taken you through, on INNS, you're able to look at your pending and submitted records. You're able to look at all the records on INNS, verify photos, look at the ID guides and the information, and we also have a more function, which is also where you could look to change it to Welsh if you need to. So this is the app version, but you're able to see your pending and submitted records. Pending records happen when you don't have enough signal to be able to submit a record, and then it will submit it later on. So it does give the option of using this tool kind of offline and still being able to submit records later. You can also look at the records submitted on INNS, so you can choose a certain species you're interested in, say like Japanese knotweed, or if you're particularly interested in management of certain species, you can use the filters on this side. On the website version as well, there's filtering by catchment and by local record centre to also kind of enhance that filtering process. It also means that you can, whilst you're out in the field, you're able to, if you find a new invasive, have a look and see if it has been previously reported. We always encourage users to make a new report, especially if it has been reported before, but it's been even only a few more months since it was reported. It never hurts to put a new report in. So that's one option there. Our verification is where any user can go on and verify photos. So you get presented with just the images, no further information of a record, and asked effectively, this was reported as Himalayan balsam, do you think it is? With options of yes, no, skip if you're not familiar with that species, or you can also flag it if the photo is not appropriate or it's just something a bit random. And then once enough users have verified a photo as a yes, that is that species, it will then change to a verified record on INNS. The more options give you the ID guides, the licensing and funding, and then obviously we would always have a health and safety, but being it's invasive species, we have health and safety and biosecurity. So both just making sure that users stay safe, but also reminding people about biosecurity, and especially if you're going out and looking for invasives and likely to come in contact with them, you're therefore at risk of spreading invasive species, and so biosecurity is very, very important. Just to touch on the data is open access, able to be downloaded. That is the data licensing of a CC BY, allowing local LURCs to be able to utilise the data. And then the data itself is systematically also transferred across to NBN Atlas. They draw on the data themselves. We make it available for them. We do have an FAQ page with questions such as these questions here. So do visit that for any burning questions that you have that we might not be able to address today. And if there's any further questions, you can always get in contact. We have these videos, how-to guides. The ones here were produced by North Wales Wildlife Trust and are brilliant 2-minute clips on how to do each of the functions of INNS, and especially useful with sharing with colleagues or volunteers that you want to train up. And we also have some awareness raising videos as well. And also we do have a slide deck that has more information that we were able to just share with anyone that might be interested in sharing INNS, running through a session with it with volunteers or colleagues to upskill them and make INNS more achievable for everyone. So this is our final slide. So it would be very, very good if you haven't already done so to download the app, visit the website, and I would really like to recognise all the funders and everyone involved in the development, and also all the local action groups and stakeholders that during the development fed back and gave us a lot of vital information that formed how INNS eventually formed as a tool, because these are the people that are actually going to be using it on site. So I really would like to recognise their feedback as well. And that's everything from us. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, thank you both. It's a really useful tool and really nice to see the sort of level of detail that can go into a record, and then also seeing how the tool's used from sort of first sighting of an invasive species right through to restoration. So yeah, really good. So we'll save questions for the end, but if you do have any, you can put them in the chat box now while you still have them in your head. But yeah, next up is Andy Virtue from the Environment Agency to talk about work on floating pennywort.
Can everyone see that? Is that a yes? Lucy, you're on mute.
Yeah, if you just pop it into presenter mode.
Oh, right. Yes, good point. Hang on a minute. You're in my way, you see, Lucy. I'll just minimize you 1 second. Okay, is that good?
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. Well, hello, everybody. I can't see you, but hello, everybody. My name's Andy Virtue. I work in Yorkshire for the Environment Agency. And I'm going to talk to you today very briefly about how we're proposing to manage floating pennywort on one of our catchments here. So, first slide. You probably all know this, but floating pennywort doesn't come from the United Kingdom. It's an invasive non-native species. It comes from South America or North America, potentially, because its native range actually spreads across the 2 continents. And I must admit, this surprised me when I was doing a bit of research over the last few days, that it's native to as far off as Canada. So if you think about the environmental conditions there, it's well suited to growing here. And it likes emergent or it likes still or slow flowing fresh water. So it's quite happy on a lot of our water systems here in the UK. It's free floating or rooted. It's happy either way. So it first arrived in the UK in Essex in 1990. It arrived as an ornamental plant. It's got a very pretty leaf. It was popular for garden ponds and aquaria. But unfortunately, people then realised it just grew like bonkers. And before they knew it, it had spread all over the garden pond or all through the aquarium, and it was choking all the light out. So what did people think? Let's pop it in the local river or stream or lake where it can grow somewhere else instead. And unfortunately, that did happen, and it's done rather well wherever it's been put. It generally moves downstream, but on canal systems, it can move upstream due to boat traffic. And the rising cost of floating pennywort, it's costing us about £25 million a year now, of which 4 million is actual control. These are estimates. And to the Environment Agency, who manage quite a lot of it on rivers, it's about £650,000 a year. And in summary, managing floating pennywort costs about £1,000 per kilometre per year, and it's still growing, so the costs are going up. And here's a nice picture of how it's spreading. First arrived, like I said, in Kent in 1990, and it's obviously spreading along waterways from there, but also new appearances all over the country, probably where people are still dumping it, and probably still are dumping it to this day, because although now it's banned, I'm sure there's still plenty of floating pennywort out there. So education still is very important. So what are we doing in response? Well, there's been a lot of ad hoc response to this plant across the country, various areas trying their hardest to deal with this plant in various ways. What we've tried to do over the last few years is just be a bit more coordinated and systematic so we can share best practice and disseminate best practice. And we do this via the Non-Native Species Secretariat platform, but we've also got a group launched in May 2021, which created this strategy, this floating pennywort strategy, which is mainly led by British Canoeing and Angling Trust, but also other key partners like the Environment Agency, like the Canal and Rivers Trust, other big water users, the water companies, and we're all trying to try and find a systematic and coordinated approach to treating this plant that uses best practice. So we have this National Floating Pennywort Group, of which I'm the chair, and we continue to share best practice. So if you want to know about what we're up to, go to the Non-Native Species Secretariat, where there's a section on management. We've come up with this 10-stage approach to floating pennywort management, which you don't have to follow slavishly, but you can be doing your own thing and referring back to it to see whether it fits the bill for what you're doing. I mean, the 10 points, there's more information on the Non-Native Species Secretariat website, but in summary, it's first identify interested groups. So that might be the Environment Agency, the Canal and Rivers Trust, local landowners, river trusts, obviously the Angling Trust, British rowers, that kind of thing. And then establish your project area. How bad is your infestation? Is it small? Is it minor? Is it just one tributary? Is it one section of canal, or is it a whole catchment? Establish the severity of your infestation, because for example, here in Yorkshire, we've got it on different rivers, but it's worse on some than others. And then prioritize your management. Agree on who's going to deliver. And in the past here in Yorkshire, we've had endless arguments about who's going to do what. So, you know, we have experience of this. But make sure that what you're going to do and what you propose to do can be done safely, both from a human perspective and also that you can do it in a biosecure manner, so that good intentions don't actually cause the spread of this plant by poor biosecurity. And then ensure all partners are clear on what you're intending to achieve, because different people want different things. Coordinate your management, establish good comms, maybe a media plan, and consolidate your success and share with others. It's simple, isn't it? There's your 10 points, follow those and you get rid of it. But no, it's just a guide. It's a guide, and it's something that we're hoping will help people. And we've also got some case studies on the website that maybe people could look at. These are the traditional methods of control when you've got pennywort in rather a bad way. Here in Yorkshire, management is roughly divided between the Environment Agency on the rivers and the Canal and Rivers Trust on the canals. Now, at the agency, we don't use this kind of equipment because luckily we don't have the infestations that other areas have got, like the Thames. But some of you will have seen this kind of machinery in operation. The one on the right is bottom right is called a truck saw, amphibious vehicle, and the one on the left is an amphibious weed harvester. Very, very funky vehicles, but we don't use them at the agency in Yorkshire. But what we do use is chemical control, using long arm lances from boats. And the picture on the left, if anyone can recognise that, that's the Hepworth Gallery in Wakefield, where floating pennywort was gathering on a boom, and that was treated quite successfully, actually, using chemicals. Not everybody's cup of tea, I know, and I've found that through being a member of the National Floating Pennywort Forum. Some people are dead against the use of chemicals, but in the end, it's you know, we're all using different techniques in different ways to try and fight this plant. So that's the kind of like overview. This is pennywort in Yorkshire and how we're managing it. And what a pretty picture, isn't pennywort pretty? Doesn't it look nice when it's growing well? And here is an example. Some people say, well, the pennywort's not an issue for rivers, it's just an issue for canals. That's just not the case. Here's a river on this is the River Don in Doncaster, South Yorkshire, and here's pennywort growing very nicely, thank you very much. So in Yorkshire, this is roughly the picture at the moment, and although we're not at the absolute northern range of pennywort, I think that we do have the northern range of bad infestation, if that makes sense. I think beyond Yorkshire, there is pennywort, but it isn't in quite the same numbers as or density or coverage that we've got. That's nothing to be proud of. I'm just saying that this is probably the northern limit of bad infestation. So currently, we've only got floating pennywort on the rivers Calder, Ayr and Don. The Calder flows mainly through an industrial landscape into the River Ayr, which also through Leeds. I mean, that's again industrial, post-industrial, slow flowing, heavily modified rivers, perfect for floating pennywort, as is the River Don, which flows through Sheffield and then through Doncaster, Barnsley. Again, the rivers associated with the River Don, slow flowing, good for plants like floating pennywort. When you get to the north of our county, the rivers are more natural. There's less interchange with canals. That's also an issue. And generally speaking, pennywort is absent, luckily, from all of these rivers in North and East Yorkshire. And there's just a little arrow to show you that it is north of Yorkshire. That's the Tees Barrier. They do have it there, but that's outside of our remit at the moment. And so here's the three rivers that I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know the geography, the River Calder flowing into the River Ayr and then onto the Ouse. and then out through the Humber estuary, and to the south the River Don flowing through Doncaster, and again out to the Ouse and out to the Humber estuary from there. We did used to have it on the River Rother, but we've managed to get rid of it there, so that's a success story. That flows into the Don at Rotherham. So the approach until 2023 was that the Environment Agency treated the rivers, and Canal and Rivers Trust treated the canals, and that's the red here are the rivers of the upper River Calder, and the purple are the canals and cuts that are associated. In Yorkshire and in many other areas, canals and rivers are interchangeable, which when it comes to managing plants like floating pennywort is a problem. Because obviously the plant itself does not recognise these divisions. And although CRT have worked hard and the Environment Agency have worked hard in dealing with pennywort, the setup that we have is just not working. Maybe it's because we don't manage at the same time, we don't use the same techniques. It's not coordinated simply because we are using different contractors to treat it. And the evidence is is shown here that on the River Calder, the Calder catchment, pennywort is actually increasing quite significantly as well. So current management's not really working. And so we came up with this plan called the Calder Floating Pennywort Catchment Plan, very catchy, using a variety of techniques to try and treat this plant hopefully in a more systematic, coordinated way. The target is always to eliminate it, isn't it? Always. The programme starts this year for an initial 3 years, hopefully. And then obviously we're not going to get rid of it in 3 years, but this will hopefully be a rolling programme. The proposal, using the premise that nature does not recognise boundaries, it's a joined up treatment programme for the rivers, canals, navigations and marinas within the Calder catchment. And we're going to use a single contractor following a coordinated treatment programme. They will do 2 full sweeps of the river and canal and navigations using chemical treatment with glyphosate, plus this headwaters down pennywort patrol every month, at least every month, supported by targeted volunteer events at hotspots. And also we're using the pennywort weevil at select locations. The organisations involved in this are us, the Environment Agency, the Canal and Rivers Trust. We've got financial contribution from Yorkshire Water. We've got the Angling Trust, Paddle UK, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, all involved, and Cabby are doing the weevil introductions. The River Stewardship Company are our contractor, which the Canal and Rivers Trust are very, it's very kindly agreed that they can be the single contractor, and that's been difficult for the CRT because they have frameworks in place, contractors in place, and so they've gone the extra mile to try and help us use one contractor for the whole system. So the pennywort patrols. This is the idea of a guy called Andy G, who I think will be on this call. He's a paddler from the Thames area, and he's been successful in I wouldn't say eradicated. You can never really use that word with floating pennywort, but certainly moving floating pennywort down a catchment and making it disappear from a headwaters down approach. And he advocates these pennywort patrols every fortnight. He says that basically you go to the top end of the catchment and you wherever it is, you manually remove it in a forensic way, not just some contractor with a great big long arm lance spraying big stands of it. This is actual physical, difficult, just taking out individual strands, and then you own that section. So obviously we're constrained by money. So at the moment we're just going to do it once a month over the full year, but we'll have some extra visits in the summer. Andy G recommends every 2 weeks. Probably, actually, if you have the money or resources or volunteers, probably every week would be even better in the summer months. But that's where we are at the moment. So on each day, the team finds the most upstream location of floating pennywort, and then they start removing the pennywort and stacking it on the bank, being careful to ensure that everything is removed. And this continues downstream as far as possible in one day. And this is, I like this term because although it relates more to canals, win the pound, so maybe from one lock system to another, it's also applicable to river systems where you've got obvious defining features going down. So you win a certain area and then you keep winning it. Now we've not done that yet in Yorkshire, but Andy G has achieved that. So credit to him that he's actually got that going and it's working for him. And here's an example of how it would work for us. This is the Upper Calder. Here you can see the rivers, the canals, and the navigations are all interchangeable. This all the way down the Calder, it's like this. So the green is a section of canal, the orange is a section of river, and then the red is the navigable river in between. So the first thing is you start at the very top. You find the upstream limit of your floating pennywort. That's where you start. You win that pound, you win number 1. And then when you've won it, number 2. And the reason why we're doing it in this order is because the boat traffic could potentially move the pennywort upstream on the canals, which it can't do on the rivers. And also we've got more natural flows going down the rivers, which helps get rid of the pennywort. So one is obviously the canal is obviously the biggest risk. So then once we've won that, we go to the next section, and every time they go out, every month or whenever it is, every 2 weeks, they go straight back to the start, to the top of number 1, and they check that there's nothing growing there. And if there's nothing growing there, they then move on to the next section down. So it's not rocket science, but it is, time consuming, dedicated, potentially expensive, but it's what we're going to trial. And what about the marinas or the hotspots? These areas that could keep continually drip feeding pennywort back into the system. This is where we feel our partners could be of use. Our partners could engage landowners, because some of these landowners, and it's not the CRT it's not CRT who manage a lot of these marinas. It's private marinas, so they could be engaged separately. Volunteer events could be organised for these, because often these have got a lot of pennywort in them. And if there's resistance, then that's when maybe we or the CRT could step in to try and help. So here's an example of one of these hotspots. It's called Fairies Hill on the Calder catchment near Wakefield. And here that we're using what's called the cut and float technique. So there's a paddler in the water cutting off big rafts of floating pennywort, bringing them to the side where volunteers rake them in and compost them on the sides. And so that, that's a good, really entertaining way to spend a day if it's a nice sunny day, getting rid of all your pennywort. This is an example of an event that was held last year at another marina, just to show that work is going on in the catchment using volunteers. Also in our armoury is the pennywort weevil. The releases in Yorkshire are coordinated by Cabby. Yorkshire Water have funded 3 in Yorkshire to date, with 1 more planned for 2024, which is on the Calder catchment. This one will be jointly funded by Yorkshire Water, the agency, and Canal and Rivers Trust. So we're all working together. The pennywort weevil, it's not the magic answer to floating pennywort that some people hope, but it can provide sustainable control and reduce the impact and spread of pennywort. And it could be particularly good in hard to access areas and backwaters where it's more conventional management's more difficult. And so here's a picture, nice picture of the team at Cabby looking. So this is a site in Barnsley where we introduced the weevil last year, and they're having a good look to see if they can find any evidence of the pennywort burrowing into the actual stems of the plant. For those of you who don't know how this insect works, it's from the native range of pennywort in Argentina. It's been rigorously tested, so don't worry, it's not just going to suddenly start munching all our native plants. The idea is that the insect is released early in the season. The adults feed on the leaves, and you can see here some leaf damage from floating pennywort, from the weevil rather. But the added benefit is that the larvae, when they hatch, they burrow into the stem of the plant and the roots, and they eat it from the inside. So they just basically cause the plant to collapse. And so it's a hopefully, because it's still very much being monitored by CABI, but hopefully it'll be part of the answer. And here's our next weevil release site, which is definitely a problem for us. We think it might be the original source of infection on the Calder catchment. It's got outfalls to the river and the canal, so it's a problem for us and CRT. And so the weevils being introduced here next year, fingers crossed, we will. It will be a success. So this is a rolling programme. If successful, the Calder catchment plan could be repeated for the River Don and associated canals, and the River Aire and associated canals in Yorkshire. And if that was a success, then we've pretty much got rid of it. Special thanks to Andy G, because he's the guy that's come up with a lot of these. That's him, by the way. He's come up with a lot of the ideas that I've put them into practice. That's the main thing, that you know, these are not just ideas, these are working for Andy, so hopefully they can work for other people too. And just one final note of caution. I said floating pennywort is only in those big rivers in Yorkshire. Well, we only found out last week that we've got a small infestation of pennywort in the River Hull. Not actually on the main river, but in a drain that's, you know, part of the catchment. And you can see, I've included this picture here on the left because you can see just how easily that has happened. Somebody's clearly walked along that footpath with some pennywort and just dumped it over that handrail on the left where it started to grow. The current coverage is only about 10 meters by 2 meters. It's a tiny plot. But from little acorns grow mighty oaks, as we all know. And if left unchecked, this could be, you know, infecting a catchment that currently it doesn't exist in. So none of us are resting on our laurels. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. That was great. And yeah, brilliant work on floating pennywort. And I think there's been quite a few events this week, volunteering events to remove it. So yeah, lots going on and really nice to hear about it. So I think we're just over time, but if speakers are happy, we could hang on for a few minutes just for any questions. So we've got one already. I think this one's for you, Steph. So are there any thoughts of including coastal or marine invasive species in INNS mapper in the future?
That's a really great question. So in short, yes. Part of the justification for excluding marine in this first iteration was the focus of INNS mapper being on the management of invasive species. And so as a steering group, we were hearing kind of limited evidence of management of marine, more marine than estuarine potentially, but marine invasive species. And so given the core focus of INNS mapper on the management aspect, it didn't quite align. I would very much welcome being corrected on that or any updates that come with that. But yeah, that is something that we have had a little bit of feedback on, and in future iterations, we definitely would look to review and kind of gather that data as to if it is needed or actually if it's still the case of why we excluded it previously. And just to add to that question as well, in the future, any kind of suggestions that have come back from many stakeholders on future opportunities for INNS mapper, we really welcome as well. So we do have an email address that you can get in contact with for any feedback that you think, oh, this might be helpful for INNS mapper development. Do let us know. Timescales for that would be not for at least another year or so, but then we'll have those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. So one here about the weevil. Is there any risk of the weevil becoming an invasive species?
People always ask that question, don't they? It's been rigorously tested. It's not like the olden days of releasing cane toads in Australia. I'm not an expert on this. You'd have to speak to CABI, but as far as I'm aware, the only plant that the weevil will eat, other than the one it's after, is a native one that's relatively rare and doesn't occur in the locations where we're releasing the weevil. So it's not going to suddenly start munching its way through all our native flora. Well, I say that, but you know, who am I to say that? That's the evidence so far.
Thanks, Andy. Have there been any investigations into the possible effects on other aquatic life from using chemicals to control pennywort?
Yeah, it's an issue, isn't it? And glyphosate is, I mean, in theory, is safe, but there are many people who don't agree with that. Currently, it's licensed for use in or near water, and we're following that. If there was an alternative, and I have had my eyes open to this through the national group, we have had used chemicals a lot in Yorkshire. I don't deny. Many other people don't. If there is an alternative, it probably should be used ahead of chemicals. Currently, we're still using them, but you know, management techniques will be revised and tightened, and hopefully we can move away from the use of too many chemicals, indiscriminate use of chemicals. I think in large river systems, the risk is pretty low, but I do accept that potentially it is a risk. But again, I'm not a scientist. We just follow the guidance, and currently the guidance is that it's safe to use.
Thanks, Andy. And someone's asked how they can volunteer to help remove floating pennywort.
Yeah, well, again, it varies across the country. In some areas they have really good volunteer setups where they do, you know, they have regular events. Here in Yorkshire, we do have them. We don't have them as much as other people. I would imagine contacting your local wildlife group would be the best way of going forwards with this, or British Canoeing, or sorry, mental block now.
Angling Trust.
Thank you very much, the Angling Trust. Yes, stepped in and saved me, Steph.
I'll put a link in the chat to the page on our website about the Floating Pennywort Strategy, and that's got some links to like contact the Angling Trust and other groups that are involved, so you can do it that way. I'll also put one in to the list of local action groups, because there's lots of organisations all across the country doing work on not just floating pennywort, but lots of other invasive species. So I'll stick both of those in if anyone is interested in getting involved volunteering. I've just seen another question come in as well. Oh, actually, it's a comment, so saying removing pennywort looks very satisfying.
Yeah,
It
can
is.
be. Yeah, especially for a weevil.
Yeah, just give a few more seconds for any last questions. But if anyone does have, does think of anything afterwards, you can get in touch with the Secretariat. I'll put our email address in the chat, and then we can put you in touch with the speakers if there's anything that you wanted to ask.
Just to add on, for INNS Mapper, on the website, on the FAQ page, there's a section that's got the email address for the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust to get in contact with the INNS Mapper steering group. So that's the email address to be using to contact INNS Mapper if you feel like you need to. And yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone for attending and hearing about our tool for reporting invasives, and maybe get out on the weekend and get mapping.
Yeah, that looks like all of the questions. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. And like Steph said, thank you everyone for joining. Oh, actually, before we go, we've got one last question. Can INNS Mapper be used in the overseas territories?
So it's GB specific. Technically, it won't stop you from doing a report, but the use is for GB.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks,
all.
Lucy. Thanks for
Thanks,
hosting
everyone.
it.
Happy Invasive Species Week. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye from Yorkshire.
Yeah.